grinning teeth in the blackness. A man is running down a dark hall, glancing over his shoulder in terror. He carries a clipboard and wears a standard Foundation lab coat. Behind him, in the shadows, a figure floats toward him at a steady pace. He tries to run faster, but can't seem to increase the distance between them. A long, gnarled hand with jagged fingernails stretches toward his shoulder. Fingers curl around to grab him when he wakes up in bed, sitting up and screaming. Too deadly, shrieks of fear, pain, and shock are just another part of the job. But as Dr. Simon makes his usual walk to the break room in search of a fresh cup of coffee, the scream that rips through the quiet makes him freeze in place. The coffee cup slips from his grasp, smashing to pieces on the floor, and he barely even notices the mess. He stares at the closed door, listening to the sound. He has never, in all of his years at the Foundation, heard such an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He waits for whatever will bring the scream to a halt, but such mercy doesn't come. There's no wet gurgle that cuts off the sound, no wailing D-class escorted from the room to be thrown back in his cell, no thud of a body slumping to the ground. Whoever is screaming just keeps screaming again and again until his voice begins to rasp. Dr. Simon can't resist his curiosity, the insatiable need for understanding that led him down the path of scientific research in the first place. He knocks on the door of the room until supervising researcher Dr. Myers answers, brow furrowed in confusion at the interruption. Before his colleague can admonish him, Dr. Simon inquires about the nature of the anomaly in the room. What could possibly cause a man to make that sort of sound without killing him? Dr. Myers shuts the door behind him, takes Dr. Simon aside, and explains that the culprit is nothing but a simple doll. Dr. Simon can't help but laugh at this, shaking his head in disbelief. Does the doll do anything? Does it attack its victims with a knife like Chucky? Does its head spin around in a circle? Does it vomit pea soup? Does it crawl along the ceiling and spit spiders and maggots? No, Dr. Myers shakes his head. The doll simply sits there. It was first recovered from a child's bedroom in an allegedly haunted house and seems to trigger extreme, inexplicable, yet all-consuming terror in anyone who observes it for a prolonged period of time. Otherwise, it does not appear to do any damage. Well, that sounds a hell of a lot more interesting than watching research assistants throw different objects into SCP-914 for the 100th time, or filling out paperwork, or any of the other inane busywork Dr. Simon has been saddled with lately. Still chasing that undeniable curiosity, Dr. Simon makes a request. Will Dr. Myers assign him to examine the doll? Specifically, can he be granted permission to observe it up close and experience its fear-inducing effect for himself? Dr. Myers recognizes the spark in his younger colleague's eye, the fascination with the dark and unknown that led so many of them to work at this very Foundation. How can he say no to that? Besides, the anomaly is largely harmless and isn't going to do any damage that a trip to an in-house counselor and some prescription tranquilizers can't fix. He agrees, and Dr. Simon is transferred to his team the very next day. As Dr. Myers unlocks the door to the doll's containment chamber, Dr. Simon can feel the electric surge of anticipation beneath his skin. He notices his hands are sweating, and he wipes them on his lab coat quickly. Best to maintain a professional appearance, an air of unmoved confidence. Now, he thinks to himself, let's get a look at this infamous nightmare doll. When he enters the room and lays eyes on the thing, he can't stop his face from falling in disappointment. He was expecting something grotesque, a cracked china doll with dark, vacant eye sockets, a soft-sewn doll made from leather of indeterminate origins, but instead, there's just a lumpy clay figure sitting in front of him, loosely constructed into the shape of a nude woman. At least he assumes her to be nude, since the doll has no clothing. The figure isn't detailed enough to be certain. He briefly considers turning around and leaving the room right away, but he was so insistent in asking to be reassigned, he can't just give up so quickly. He'll examine the doll more closely. He asks if he may touch the doll, and Dr. Myers responds in the affirmative. He lifts the doll, feeling its weight in his hands. As he turns it over to examine it, a large piece breaks off. He gasps, horrified at the prospect of damaging an anomalous item on his first day of working with it. But Dr. Myers reassures him that this is completely fine. That curiosity rears its head again, and Dr. Simon breaks off another part, just to see what might happen. He snaps off pieces until all that remains is a rectangular clay piece that vaguely suggests a torso and pelvis. All of a sudden, the remnants of the doll vanish from his hands. He looks up and sees the same clay doll lying on the floor 1 meter away. That's not scary at all. It's fascinating. Dr. Simon is just about to pick up the doll and try breaking it apart once again when a peal of cruel, crazed laughter sends a chill down his spine. It isn't Dr. Myers laughing. The voice sounds like it belongs to a woman, though it's difficult to tell much from the twisted cackle. He spins around, searching for the source of the laughter, but there's nothing, and no one in the room with him except for the doll. Minutes pass this way, with the laughter ringing in his ears, until all at once, all goes silent. He turns his eyes back to the doll, but it's gone. He's just about to leave the room and inform Dr. Myers when he catches a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye. He turns to see what is there, and immediately wishes that he hadn't. The first thing he sees is her smile, stretched painfully wide, tongue waggling out from between her parted teeth. Then her eyes, rolling wildly in her head, dilated pupils locking onto him with a stomach-churning intensity. Long snarls of black hair drift behind her as she floats toward him, feet off the ground, just barely dragging the tips of her toes along the floor. He would describe the thing as a woman, but she doesn't look quite human. Her proportions are all wrong. Fingers long and sharp, waist cinched in, as if she were wearing a tightly laced corset. Neck so narrow that it shouldn't be able to support the weight of her head. Though her mouth does not move from the cross between a grin and a grimace, she can hear the laughter again, growing louder and louder, bouncing around the inside of his skull. There's that scream, the sound he heard while walking past the locked door only 1 day ago. The sound of a man discovering that, no matter how much technology they invent, or how many cities they construct to convince themselves otherwise, humans are still prey, still animals cowering in a dark corner, while a predator advances toward them. For a moment, he wonders who is screaming, but the raw soreness in his throat tells him that it's his own voice being heard by passers-by in the hall now. The woman drifts closer and closer, moving at a slow and steady pace, as every hair on Dr. Simon's body stands to attention, every primal instinct in his body commanding him to run, to protect himself, however he possibly can. He scrambles backward, afraid to take his eyes off the figure, no matter how horrific the sight of her is. He doesn't want to think about what she might do while his back is turned. He takes one step, then another, until his back hits solid stone. The wall. She quite literally has him cornered, and there is nowhere to run. Like a rabbit face to face with a snake, all Dr. Simon can do is tremble, pale and helpless, as the figure draws near. Her grotesque face stretches toward him, mottled gray flesh, too many teeth, and inhuman eyes only inches away from his own face. Her mouth opens even wider than it was before, wider than he ever could have imagined, and he braces for the worst thing he can think of. But no pain comes. Instead, an ear-splitting scream rips from her throat, a gust of hot, sour air invading his nose and mouth, and the figure vanishes. Dr. Simon forgets all of his professionalism in that moment, sprinting out of the room and not stopping for a moment until he is safely on the other side of the containment chamber door. There, Dr. Myers is waiting for him. Well, Dr. Myers eyes him with interest. Was his curiosity sated? As the adrenaline slowly leaves his body and his heart rate returns to normal, Dr. Simon nods. Now he understands exactly why someone would scream like that in the presence of a simple doll. Dr. Myers places a friendly hand on the younger man's shoulder, reminding him to take a deep breath and let go of the anomalous terror. The worst is over, and the doll, and its accompanying entity, will not bother him anymore as long as he does not observe it for a lengthy period of time again. He congratulates Dr. Simon as well, informing him that he is the 25th person to observe this anomaly, and only the 4th to do so willingly. So Dr. Simon gives himself a pat on the back, thanks Dr. Myers for the opportunity, and returns to his office. A little bit of mind-numbing paperwork is welcome after that much excitement. A couple of hours pass, and Dr. Simon finds himself beginning to droop. Whether it's the resulting crash after such a spike in adrenaline, or simply the malaise that
I went to an internet cafe. The guy showed me a gaming computer. Not enough.
that takes hold most weekday afternoons, He knows the cure. Another cup of coffee. Find that Dr. Saboya put on a fresh pot of coffee. He pours himself a cup and strikes up a conversation with the other researchers in the room, recounting the story of his encounter with the doll, taking a moment for a self-effacing laugh at the memory of how unbelievably frightened he was. The others commiserate, sharing stories of their most harrowing encounters on the job that turned out to be perfectly fine. Dr. Saboya is in the middle of an anecdote about her first day on the job, wherein she found herself assigned to SCP-173 and was so terrified to blink that she carried around eye drops to keep her eyes from drying out, when Dr. Simon's eyes suddenly go wide. She asks him what the matter is, but all he does in response is recoil and let out a guttural, almost animalistic scream, dropping his new coffee mug in the process. The other researchers surround him, attempting to check him for any physical ailments. All the while, he stammers and babbles in the incoherent language of the utterly panic-stricken, repeating that she followed him, that she's here, that she's coming right toward him. As they press the point further, Dr. Saboya is able to put the pieces together enough to draw a conclusion. He is claiming to see a manifestation of the same entity he encountered earlier, floating down the hall in pursuit of him. That's impossible, she insists. The entity is incapable of breaking containment. He must still be experiencing residual psychological distress as a result of his encounter. They'll escort him to his office and administer a mild sedative to calm his nerves, and he'll realize that he isn't in any danger. But before the researchers can say another word, they all suddenly collapse to the ground, the floor of the break room littered with their limp, unconscious bodies. After an indeterminate amount of time has passed, Dr. Saboya awakens with a splitting headache, a rush of nausea, and the feeling that she was just dreaming about something awful, but she can't remember what it was. She quickly snaps back to alertness, gently shaking her colleagues awake. One by one, they rouse, with one exception. No matter what they try, no one is able to wake Dr. Simon. He is moved to the medical department for observation, where he remains in a coma for 3 days before he mysteriously passes away. Though his death cannot be directly attributed to his observation of the doll, Dr. Myers has his suspicions. He is especially troubled by the implication that the entity somehow broke containment. He requests reclassification of the entity, SCP-136, to Keter class, but the request is denied, higher-ups citing the possibility of a psychic attack by a different anomaly in the same facility. Years pass, and Dr. Myers puts the incident out of his mind. Then, one day, another round of experimentation with SCP-136 is ordered. A handful of Class Ds are shoved into the room, and Dr. Myers stands outside to supervise and ensure none of them leave before they are authorized to do so. Like clockwork, the sound of their screams follows around 20 minutes later. As the experiment concludes, yielding the usual results, the guards remove the subject from the room with Dr. Myers' help. He is pulling a man toward the door by the elbow when everything goes black. Dr. Myers is woken by the sharp sting of a slap to the face and a worried guard telling him that he collapsed with no apparent cause. As for the 3 Class Ds used in the experiment, they were left comatose and died days later. Memories of Dr. Simon come rushing back, and Dr. Myers reaches out to his supervisors once more. This time, he requests a reclassification and reevaluation once more. SCP-1 the day while the or it is currently classified as Euclid, though I have some concerns about that decision that I will get to in a moment. SCP-136 refers to 2 phenomena under that shared designation, SCP-136-1 and SCP-136-2. SCP-136-1 is a doll of varying appearance, though usually manifesting as a female figure made from cloth, wood, metal, or clay. Currently, the Foundation has not been able to measure anything unusual about the doll itself on an empirical level. However, this being the SCP Foundation, it is of course not an ordinary doll. This brings us to SCP-136-2, the subject of my deepest concerns. SCP-136-2 is an incorporeal nude or partially nude figure, whose gender presentation corresponds to that of the form that the doll takes. Ordinarily, this is female, but the doll does appear in a masculine form approximately 10% of the time. It manifests once the doll has been viewed for a duration of approximately 20 minutes, and the first sign of its appearance is the sound of creepy laughter, followed by a period of eerie silence. The doll disappears, and the figure, ranging in size from 1.9 to 2.1 meters, appears to take its place. Upon appearance, SCP-136-2 is posed in a provocative manner and will move through the air at a pace of 0.2 meters per second toward the subject or subjects that observe the doll. As it grows closer, the laughter grows louder. By the time the entity is within 1 or 2 meters, the victim will be frozen in fear, will collapse to the ground, or will back up until hitting a wall. When the figure reaches 5 centimeters of the subject, it will scream once, then vanish, before reappearing in its original location. The appearance of this entity has been characterized as deeply disturbing, with an unnaturally wide mouth, bared teeth, enlarged irises, and bloodshot eyes. Exposure to SCP-136-2 has been linked to night terrors for up to 6 months following the initial encounter. Originally, the entity was never seen breaching containment. Obviously, this was not, in fact, the case. In spite of the life-threatening incidents linked to SCP-136, its official containment procedures state that, quote, no extraordinary containment procedures are necessary. It is kept in a standard 10 by 10 by 10 meter concrete containment room, wherein SCP-136-1 is locked in a transparent plastic case. There is no video surveillance of the room when it is not being actively examined. Only Class D personnel are permitted to enter the chamber more than once in a 30-day period. But why is this the case? If SCP-136 is indeed dangerous, posing a threat to Foundation staff and causing significant loss of life, as well as damage to employee morale, why not increase the security of its containment? Why not upgrade its class to Keter? Why not permit the team to attempt to destroy it, neutralizing the internal threat? Well, the rabbit hole of research that I tumbled down during my investigation of SCP-136 led me to the answer. Dr. Myers, a member of the original research team assigned to SCP-136, filed a series of complaints and requests with the O5 Council. As you know by now, these requests were denied, with seemingly no explanation. Well, as is often the case at the SCP Foundation, there was more to the story than there first appeared. Dr. Myers was removed from his position, and a note was added to the official SCP-136. 136 is proving valuable for enhanced interrogation. Memos on the subject favor of an interrogation tool to be used against members of groups of interest. The records of these interrogations were sealed, but I attempted to uncover more about when these enhanced interrogations ceased, presumably due to the intervention of the Ethics Committee. I hope that I'm mistaken, that some vital information has eluded my grasp, but as far as I can tell, they never did. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-5853, Ticky Taffy Town.